It was one of those mornings when the air feels thick with memory. The lake was covered in fog, soft as milk, and the gulls were just waking up. I remember holding my cup of coffee by the window, thinking how the steam looked just like the mist outside. I hadn't felt this nervous in years. Today was supposed to be my big day, my first solo exhibition since retiring from teaching. 10 years of quiet, of painting alone, of letting color speak when words could not. I walked down the gravel path to the studio, the one my late husband built with his own hands. Every step felt like a heartbeat. I could almost hear his voice. "Make sure you sign your name big this time, Clara. Don't hide it in the corner." He always said that. He knew how long it took me to believe my name mattered. The fog curled around the studio like it was guarding something. The wooden door creaked the same way it did when I first opened it, 25 years ago. The smell of linseed oil and old brushes hit me, that familiar mix of work and patience. On the wall, my canvases waited quietly, faces of women, windows, reflections. I'd spent a decade capturing stillness, trying to paint what silence feels like. But that morning, the silence felt different, heavier. Because right before I unlocked the door, I saw it, the new sign. It wasn't the one I had ordered. The letters were clean, bold, glossy white against black colon, the Clara Donovan art project. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the printer messed up. Maybe the delivery truck stopped at the wrong address. Then I saw my nephew Evan's name on the small banner hanging below, a community initiative founded by Clara Donovan, in honor of his aunt. My stomach sank. In honor of. That phrase, it sounds so sweet until you realize it's what people write about the dead. I stood there, the key cold in my hand, and just stared. My name was still there, tucked between his and a hyphen. But somehow it already felt erased. Inside, the radio was on. I must have left it playing yesterday while cleaning. A talk show, and joining us today is Clara Donovan, founder of the Clara Donovan Art Project, a new space bringing art and community together. My own name, my own studio, spoken by someone else. He was talking about my work, our family legacy, like it was his vision. His project. He used the same words I'd written in my proposal 10 years ago to bring light to forgotten corners. Only now it was his mission. I felt a tremor go through my fingers. Not anger, not yet, just confusion. The kind that comes when the world shifts half an inch, and suddenly the floor isn't where it used to be. The interviewer laughed on the radio, saying how touching it was that he named it after me. Evan said, "She inspired me. She taught me everything. I just want her legacy to live on." Legacy. Another word for done. Finished. Past tense. I turned the dial off. The silence afterward rang louder than his voice. People think betrayal comes loud, with shouting, or slammed doors. But most of the time, it's quiet. It slips in through kindness, through phrases like "you've done enough," or "we just want to help." I sat down on the stool by the easel, and looked at the unfinished painting in front of me. A woman sitting by the window, half her face lit, half hidden. I hadn't decided what to call it yet. Maybe reflection, maybe the witness. But now I thought, maybe it should just be called erased. I tried to laugh at myself. "Don't be dramatic, Clara," I whispered. "It's just a sign." But deep down, I knew it wasn't, that it was a message. That morning, the air smelled like rain. The fog outside pressed against the glass, making everything look soft and far away. I could see my reflection in the window, my gray hair tied back, the wrinkles that came from years of smiling at students, the quiet lines of someone who had learned to stay gentle, even when life wasn't. And yet, there I was, fading behind the mist, a shape that could disappear with one more breath. I walked back outside and touched the sign. My fingers left small prints on the glass, like proof that I still existed. I thought about all those years of teaching kids how to sign their work. "Your name is your promise," I used to say. "It tells the world you were here, that this piece came from your hands." Now my own promise was hanging above me, rebranded. I wanted to tear it down, to shout, to call Evan right then and there. But the truth is, I didn't. I just stood there, holding the key, too tired for confrontation, and too proud to beg for understanding. Because what do you even say when someone takes something that was never supposed to be taken? He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The studio was spotless, too spotless. Brushes arranged by color, canvases aligned perfectly, even the floors swept. Evan and Vanessa must have been here. They'd probably helped me tidy up for the big opening. Everything looked right but felt wrong, like a hotel room that smelled like home but wasn't. I sat on the wooden bench and looked around. My sketches, my jars of pigment, my old kettle on the heater. Everything I loved, and yet the air carried someone else's fingerprints. I whispered to the empty room, I spent a lifetime painting so I could see myself clearly, and now they've used my own colors to paint me out. The clock on the wall ticked twice, then stopped. Just a battery dying, but it sounded like an ending. I made coffee again, poured it into my chipped blue mug, the one with a tiny crack shaped like a lightning bolt. The kind of flaw that makes something yours. As I stirred the sugar, I thought about how small acts become anchors. The mug you keep, the chair you refuse to replace, the studio that still carries your scent. That morning, I realized how fragile identity really is. It doesn't vanish overnight. It erodes, grain by grain, every time you let someone else decide what your name stands for. When I stepped back outside, the fog had started to lift. Across the lake, the water shimmered like brushed glass. It looked beautiful, but distant. I ran my hand along the rough wooden frame of the door, then traced the new letters again. The Reed Donovan Art Project. My name, but not mine. And in that still moment, a thought came, sharp and cold as the lake wind. I had spent my whole life trying to teach people how to see. Maybe it was time I learned how to be seen. I closed the door behind me, locked it, and whispered to the empty air, this isn't over. Not yet. As I walked back toward the house, the gravel crunched beneath my shoes like slow applause. Somewhere in the distance, the foghorn sounded, a low, steady note that felt almost like a warning. By the time I reached my porch, the sun had broken through the mist. I looked back once more. The new sign caught the light, and for a second, the reflection of my face appeared across the glass, perfectly aligned with the words that tried to erase me. It was almost poetic, almost funny. I smiled, a small tired smile, and said quietly, they might have borrowed my name, but they'll never paint my story. And that's when I decided, tomorrow, I'd reopen that studio. Not for them. Not for the crowd. But for me. It's quiet here by the lake. You can hear the world breathe if you stand still long enough. The waves tap gently against the rocks, and the air smells of pine and old rain. This has been my home for more than 30 years, a small cabin with peeling paint, a crooked mailbox, and a studio out back that always smelled like turpentine and sunlight. People say Windermere is too quiet for them. For me, it's the only place where silence feels alive. Most mornings, I start the same way, a cup of black coffee, an old record humming low in the background, and the first brushstroke of the day before the fog lifts. I used to joke that I didn't need company, because the lake talked enough for two people. But lately, it's been talking about time, how it moves without asking if you're ready. That's probably why I said yes when Evan called. My nephew. He sounded excited, almost boyish, like he used to when he was little, and would mix my paints just to watch the colors swirl. He told me he and his wife were driving up from the city. We want to help, Aunt Clara, he said. Let's bring your art back to life. I laughed. It's not dead, sweetheart. It's just been sleeping. He said they had ideas, modern ones. Social media, press coverage, sponsorships, things I'd never cared to understand. I've always believed art should move people, not algorithms, but Evan had that charm, the kind that makes you believe he's already done all the hard work. I suppose I wanted to see him happy. Or maybe I wanted to believe that my world could still grow again. When they arrived, the air changed. Vanessa stepped out first, tall, elegant, her hair pulled tight, her smile practiced. She carried herself like a photograph, beautiful, but distant. Evan followed, still wearing that eager grin. He hugged me too hard, and for a moment I could smell the city on him, coffee, ambition, a hint of exhaustion. They spent the weekend here, talking about reviving the studio. Vanessa walked around taking pictures, speaking in marketing terms I only half understood: branding, audience engagement, visual storytelling. She said it all so smoothly, like art was just another campaign. I told her the studio didn't need branding, it needed breathing. She laughed softly and said, "Oh, I know. But sometimes to keep something alive, you have to teach it how to be seen." I didn't argue. I'd learned that people like Vanessa don't mean harm, they just live in a world that runs on attention. Evan promised to repaint the front deck, fix the windows, update the lighting. He worked late into the night, hammering, sanding, rearranging my canvases. It was sweet, really. For the first time in a while, there was laughter echoing through these old walls again. I remember watching him from the kitchen window, the way he held a paintbrush like he used to when he was 12. There was something tender in it, nostalgia, maybe, or guilt. I told myself this was a good thing. Family helping family, what could possibly go wrong with the ton? The third morning, I found a new sign design on Vanessa's tablet. "We were thinking of calling it the Clara Donovan Studio," she said, smiling. "It sounds more inclusive, you know? Like a partnership between generations." I frowned. "But it's my studio. And read well, that's Evan's middle name, not mine." She waved it off. "Oh, we'll just present it as a collaboration. You inspired it. He's carrying it forward. It honors you. That word again, honor. It always comes before the part where someone takes over." Evan looked at me, almost pleading. "It's just a small change, Aunt Clara. People will connect with it better. Trust me." And I did. Because that's what family does. We trust, even when the gut whispers otherwise. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Don't wait until they sign your name for you." I didn't know why those words came to me, maybe because I'd seen too many friends lose their stories to those who spoke louder. Maybe because I was starting to see the same pattern in my own reflection. The next week, we began cleaning the studio together. Vanessa organized every shelf, labeling supplies like it was an office. Evan set up new equipment: LED lights, a laptop, a camera for behind-the-scenes footage. They talked about turning the space into a community center, a place for local artists. It sounded wonderful. But something about the way they said our studio made me pause every time. Still, I told myself not to be paranoid. I was grateful. Grateful to have them here, to hear music playing while I worked, to feel energy in the air again. The lake shimmered differently at dusk, the water catching colors I hadn't noticed in years. Maybe change wasn't so bad after all. One evening, we had dinner on the porch. The sky was the color of bruised peaches. Evan poured me wine and said, "You know, Aunt Clara, this place could really be something. Maybe we could host an art fair, invite the press." Vanessa added, "You deserve recognition. Real recognition. Let us handle the business side, so you can just create." It sounded kind. It also sounded like goodbye. I nodded, smiling. But inside I felt something tighten. I'd built this studio with my hands, brushstroke by brushstroke. Every nail, every stain had a memory. Could I really hand it over so easily? Later that night, I stood by the window, watching the reflection of the studio lights on the lake. They flickered like small stars, trembling on the surface. I thought about what it means to trust someone, how it's not just about believing they won't hurt you, but believing they even understand what matters to you. Evan and Vanessa were trying to help, I told myself. Maybe their way of love just looked different. Maybe the world needed their kind of noise. But deep down, a voice whispered the same sentence again: "Don't wait until they sign your name for you." The next morning, I placed my old keys on the kitchen counter. "You'll need these," I told Evan. "For deliveries, for opening the place when I'm not here." He looked surprised. "Are you sure?" He smiled. "Of course. Your family." He hugged me, his voice warm against my ear. "We won't let you down." And for the first time, I wondered what we really meant. When they left that afternoon, the lake was calm again. The seagulls circled above the dock, and the smell of fresh paint lingered in the air. I walked into the studio and stood in the center of the room, surrounded by light. Everything was cleaner, brighter, newer, but somehow less mine. "Still," I whispered, "maybe this is how it has to be. Maybe letting go is also a form of creation. I didn't know then that what I was really doing wasn't letting go, it was opening the door for a storm I never saw coming. It started one rainy Tuesday, when Evan came by with a folder under his arm, and that same easy smile he'd worn since college. He said it was just paperwork for the city grant. Nothing serious, just a formality, so the Art Council could review our collaboration. He laid the papers on my kitchen table, next to my teacup and the half-finished crossword. The words looked harmless enough, small print, neat paragraphs, nothing threatening. "You don't even need to read it all," he said. "It's standard language for funding. They just want both our names on record." I hesitated. I've never been one to sign anything without knowing what it means. But he kept reassuring me, calling me Aunt C, making jokes about how I was his lucky charm. So I skimmed the top page and saw the phrase co-investment partnership. I asked him what that meant, and he smiled like I was worrying too much. "It just makes it easier for sponsors to work with us," he said. "You're the artist. I'm just helping manage the boring stuff." He handed me a pen and pointed to the second page. "You only need to sign here, this one's just a copy. I'll bring the official version later once the city reviews it." So I signed. A small, unsteady signature that I thought meant trust. In the weeks that followed, the studio started to feel different. Evan set up a new email address, something like redonovanarts@gmail.com. He said it would look more professional. Then he made an Instagram page. At first I was flattered. Photos of my paintings, videos of me mixing colors, captions that read "Art never retires." It was sweet, really. Then one day, I saw a post founded by Evan and Vanessa Donovan. My name was there too, but tucked under a quote like a memory inspired by his aunt, Clara Donovan. I called him, laughing lightly, trying not to sound upset. "You forgot to list me as a co-founder." He paused. "Oh, Aunt C, it's just social media wording. People get confused by too many names. Don't worry, we know it's your studio." I told myself he was right. Maybe I was being sensitive. The world moves differently now, fast, flashy, less personal. But sometimes progress feels a lot like erasure wearing better shoes. A few days later, a package arrived from the local bank, documents about a new account under the Reed Donovan Project. My name wasn't on the envelope, but the address was mine. When I called the bank, the clerk said, "Oh yes, your nephew mentioned you delegated him as financial administrator." I hung up, my hands shaking, not from anger yet but from confusion. Because I had no memory of delegating anything. I opened my drawer, looked at the copy of that contract, and suddenly realized the line under my signature was blank when I signed it. I didn't remember seeing his handwriting there before. I told myself I was overreacting. He was family. He wouldn't betray me. But then little things started to shift like pieces on a chessboard. I didn't even know we were playing. He replaced my old sign with a newer, sleeker one. The website now listed our vision, written in words that didn't sound like me at all. Phrases like strategic creative partnership and social impact art. I'd spent my life believing art didn't need a reason to exist beyond truth, but apparently, truth needed a better pitch deck. One evening, I found Vanessa hosting a live video call from the studio. She was showing my latest work to some donors. When she noticed me standing by the door, she turned the camera slightly away. "Oh, there's Clara, the heart of our inspiration," she said cheerfully. Before muting the mic after they ended, she smiled. "You don't mind, do you? It's all for the project. We're building something that'll outlive us." I wanted to tell her that art already outlives us, that's the whole point. But I stayed quiet. Because silence, in families, sometimes feels like the price of keeping peace. Weeks went by, and my studio, my sanctuary, started filling with things I didn't recognize. New easels, branded merchandise, boxes labeled event supplies. I couldn't even find my own sketchbook beneath all their plans. One night, I woke up from a dream that I was standing in front of a mirror that didn't reflect me. When I looked closer, I saw Evan's face smiling back. The next morning, I found him in the studio typing on his laptop. "We're almost ready for the press release," he said. "Oh, and we'll need you to sign one more thing, a photo release form." I stared at the screen. The logo said Reed Donovan Foundation. Foundation, not project. Not studio. A foundation meant ownership, funding, legal structure. He caught my silence and said quickly, "It's just for protection, Aunt C. You'll always be the soul of this, the soul. I guess that's what they call you when they've already taken the body." That afternoon, I walked to the edge of the lake. The wind was colder than usual, and the water looked metallic, uninviting. I threw a pebble and watched the ripples stretch wider and wider, until the center disappeared. That's how it felt like, being the pebble that started something I couldn't control anymore. I thought about that contract again, the neat lines and the empty spaces between words. How trust is often written in invisible ink. You only see it fading once the damage is done. Maybe I should have asked more questions. Maybe I should have read every word twice. But when someone you love looks you in the eye and says, "Trust me," it's hard to imagine they mean anything other than kindness. Now I see it differently. Trust isn't just a signature, it's a slow surrender. One that starts with good intentions and ends with your name missing from your own door. By the time I walked back to the house, the light had changed. The studio glowed gold from the inside, but it wasn't mine anymore. It felt like a museum of a life I still lived but no longer owned. I stood there in the doorway, whispering to the shadows, "They think this is about art. But it's not. It's about belonging." And as the sun dipped behind the trees, I realized something simple, but terrifying: you don't lose everything at once. You lose it one signature at a time. It started quietly, the way storms often do, too soft to notice until you're already soaked. At first, it was just whispers. A woman at the cafe near the pier said she'd heard that I'd been struggling with my eyesight. Then a man from the art guild asked gently if I needed help remembering dates. I laughed it off, thinking people in small towns simply needed something new to talk about. But within a week, the tone changed, the looks changed. It was Vanessa's doing. I didn't have proof yet, but I could feel her fingerprints on every rumor. She had this gentle, polished way of destroying people. Never directly, never cruelly, just strategically. She'd started telling people that I was having episodes, that sometimes I saw the paintings move, that I'd mentioned figures walking across the canvas. I had said once, jokingly, that the shadows in one of my works looked alive under the afternoon light. But to her, it became evidence of decline. Soon, people repeated it as fact. "Poor Clara, she's losing her sense of reality." I overheard it one morning at the market. Two women I'd known for years stood by the flower stall. They didn't see me at first. "I heard she leaves the lights on in the studio all night," one said. "Yeah," the other whispered, "Evan and his wife have been doing their best to help her. Such good people." I stood there, holding a bag of apples, smiling like nothing was wrong. But something inside me cracked quietly, like the sound of glass under too much weight. That night, I walked into the studio and stared at my paintings. They were all still. Completely still. The only thing moving was my reflection in the glass frames. For a second, I wanted to believe maybe they were right. Maybe I was the one who'd lost perspective. But then I saw what was really happening. My kindness, my trust had become their strategy. In psychology, they call it a dependency loop. I read about it years ago when I was still teaching. One person keeps giving, the other keeps taking, until giving becomes the only language left. The more I offered help, space, love, the more they used it to define my limits. When I said yes to their ideas, I thought I was being generous. When I let them handle the paperwork, I thought I was being trusting. When I stayed silent to keep peace, I thought I was being kind. But every yes was one brick removed from the foundation of my life. And eventually, there was nothing left to stand on but silence. Vanessa was clever. She never raised her voice, never said anything I could call an accusation. She'd smile in public, touch my arm, and say, "We just worry about you, Clara. You've been under so much stress." That's how she did it. She wrapped her lies in sympathy, like poison inside sugared. Evan believed her. Or maybe he just found it easier to. It's amazing how love can blind you to convenience. The town's opinion shifted fast. Invitations to events stopped coming. My students grown now, with children of their own, stopped visiting. When they did, they looked around my studio the way doctors look at patients before delivering bad news. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of Vanessa standing near the window, talking on the phone. She didn't know I was behind her. Her reflection flickered on the glass as she said, "She doesn't even notice. It's sad, really, but at least it makes the transition easier." Transition. That word hung in the air like smoke. Transition to what? My absence. My silence didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I started writing again, small notes, details, fragments of things I heard. I filled my sketchbook not with drawings but words. The way Evan's voice changed when he talked to donors. The exact phrases Vanessa used when she checked in on me. Every date, every glance, every whisper. I told myself it was just to stay sane, but deep down, I knew it was something else. It was proof. The next week I was invited, included in a local gallery meeting. Vanessa spoke for me most of the time, explaining how I was taking a step back from leadership to focus on personal projects. I sat there, nodding, watching the faces around the table. No one asked me directly if it was true. That's how easy it is to erase someone. You don't need violence, just consensus. When the meeting ended, I walked home alone. The streets of Windermere were quiet, the lake calm under the fading sun. I passed by the reflection of the studio window, and caught sight of my own face. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. I thought about how the people who once praised my clarity now doubted my mind. How the world had shifted from color to fog without me noticing. I wasn't sure which hurt more, the betrayal, or how believable it all sounded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk and whispered to the dark. Kindness isn't supposed to make you small. Because that's what it had become, a cage I built myself. I thought compassion would protect me. I thought giving people the benefit of the doubt meant I was strong. But sometimes, being kind without boundaries is like painting with water. It looks beautiful for a moment, and then it disappears. I closed my eyes and remembered something my husband once said: light and shadow aren't enemies, Clara, they need each other to exist. Maybe that's what this was, a long lesson in contrast. The next morning, I went back to the studio. The sun cut through the windows, hitting the canvases in sharp angles. I looked around at the dust, the quiet, the stillness, and said to myself, if they want to paint me as delusional, I'll give them a masterpiece. And that's when the plan began to form, not of revenge, but of truth. Because truth, once seen, doesn't need defending. It just needs light. When Liam showed up that morning, I didn't expect him to fix anything more than a broken mirror. He was Judge Cole's grandson, young, curious, the kind of person who saw beauty in odd places. He came to drop off a legal notice for his grandmother, but stopped when he saw the old studio mirror leaning against the wall, half cracked, covered in dust. "You know," he said, running a hand over the glass, "this could be restored. It's two-way, probably from the old classrooms. They used them to study reflection and depth." I smiled faintly. That mirror's seen more truth than most people. He offered to repair it for me. I let him. It gave me an excuse to keep him around, a kind presence in a house that had started to echo with other people's voices. By the end of the week, the mirror stood tall again in the corner of my studio. Liam explained the new frame, the tint, how light could pass through one side but not the other. I told him I wanted to use it to study reflection for a new art series. What I didn't say was that reflection had become the only thing I could trust. Every morning, I pretended to paint. I mixed colors, set brushes, kept the easel in front of the mirror like always. But I watched. Through the faint glass, I could see everything: their meetings, their whispers, their careful rehearsals. Evan started bringing people in, reporters, sponsors, photographers. They'd call him Mr. Donovan, shake his hand, and praise his vision for community art. He'd gesture around the room proudly and say, "This is where we make magic." That word had begun to rot in my ears. Vanessa orchestrated everything. She walked like she owned the place, every movement polished, deliberate. I'd see her lean toward a visitor and say, "Clara's the heart, of course, but Evan's the structure." Everyone nodded. They were writing a story about me, without me. I stayed quiet, smiling politely when they noticed me. "Still painting, Aunt Clara?" someone would ask. "Oh yes," I'd say, still trying to get the light right. They didn't realize how true that was. Late at night, I'd turn off all the lamps except one, letting the mirror catch what little light remained. It reflected everything: my doubts, their lies, and the slow disappearance of my name. I started sketching again, not for beauty this time, but for memory. Every posture, every glance, every signature they practiced in the air. One evening, Liam stopped by to return a screwdriver he'd borrowed. I must have looked tired because he asked, "You okay, Miss Donovan?" He hesitated. "Do you believe people can use kindness like a weapon?" Frowned. "Depends on the person." "Then I suppose I'm the wrong kind of kind," I said, smiling faintly. He looked around the studio, at the mirror, at the half-finished paintings. "This place feels watched." I laughed softly. "It's not the place that's watched, dear. It's me learning to see again." After he left, I stayed by the mirror. The studio was quiet except for the sound of my pencil scratching against the paper. I drew the reflection of Vanessa's hand signing my name on a form I never touched. I drew Evan's smile as he told someone, "She's practically family. This is all in her honor." Honor. Such a heavy word for something so hollow. Days turned into weeks. The Reed Donovan Initiative, as they called it now, was everywhere: posters, brochures, online features. I'd see my paintings on their website with captions that didn't belong to me. A tribute to legacy. A celebration of shared vision. My work had become their advertisement. I overheard one of the visitors say, "It's touching that she's still involved, even with her condition." Her condition. That's what they called it now. Not illness, not age. Condition. Like I was a project, too. But in the mirror, I saw something else: the way Vanessa's smile would falter when she thought no one was looking. The way Evan avoided my eyes when he walked past. They knew, maybe not guilt but awareness. They knew they were crossing lines that couldn't be painted over. That night, as I sat under the single lamp, I touched the mirror's surface. My reflection stared back, calm, still. But behind it, through it, I could see the truth. They'd built their success on the illusion of light, and I'd been the shadow holding it together. But shadows can shift, and I was ready to move mine. I began keeping the mirror angled slightly toward the door. When they came in, laughing or scheming, I could see their faces clearly. I memorized every word, every plan, until their voices felt like another language I could finally translate. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because some truths, you don't speak, you let them expose themselves. One afternoon, Vanessa brought a stack of documents into the studio. "We've secured international funding," she said, beaming. "The paperwork just needs your approval." I smiled. "Leave it on the table. I'll read it later." When they left, I turned the mirror toward the light, and for the first time, I didn't see my reflection. I saw there's two figures framed in silver, building their empire on my silence. I wrote in my sketchbook that night, "They think I've gone blind to them. But I see everything now through glass, through kindness, through the lies they painted in daylight." The mirror had become more than a tool. It was the only honest witness left in the room. And soon, it would tell the story they'd worked so hard to hide. They called a community meeting at the Windmere Cultural Center that Thursday. I remember because it rained that morning, the kind of rain that makes the lake look like it's breathing. Vanessa had sent me an email about it the night before. "Just a quick update on the project," she wrote. "It'd mean a lot if you came." When I walked in, the place was packed. Familiar faces: neighbors, students, patrons, people who'd once admired my work, now whispering politely as if I'd interrupted something sacred. Evan stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand, smiling that well-rehearsed smile of his. Behind him, the banner read, "The Reed Donovan Initiative, Art for Tomorrow." There was no mention of my name. "Before we begin," Evan said, "I'd like to take a moment to honor the person who inspired all of this, my dear Aunt Clara." The audience clapped. I smiled, nodded, even waved a little. But there was something hollow about it, like applause for a eulogy no one realized they were giving. Then Vanessa stepped up beside him. Her tone was soft, almost tender. Many of you know Clara as an artist, a teacher, and a friend. But recently, we've noticed she's been under a lot of strain. Creative people, especially those who've dedicated their lives to their craft, sometimes carry their art in unconventional ways. Unconventional. The word hit like a slow punch. She continued, we've consulted with a few specialists who believe Clara may be experiencing a mild form of perceptual distortion common among aging artists. Nothing alarming, of course. We just want to ensure she's supported and safe. The room grew still. Someone coughed. I could feel the air shift, sympathy replacing respect. I stood up. I'm sorry, I said, my voice steady. Are you saying I'm delusional? Alvan raised his hands like he was calming a child. Aunt C, no one's saying that. We're just worried about you. You've been seeing things in the paintings, remember? The moving shadow C looked around the room at the faces that had once trusted me to teach them about light and color. They were studying me now, searching for signs of instability. Yes, I said, I study movement in light. That's what painters do. Vanessa smiled gently. Of course, Clara. But sometimes, the line between perception and imagination can blur. We just want to help you rest. Maybe take a step back from managing the studio for a while. There it was, the knife, hidden behind a velvet ribbon. Evan added, the board and I have agreed it's best if Vanessa and I handle operations temporarily, just until you're feeling more yourself. Myself. I wanted to laugh. Which version of me did they mean, the one who built that studio from scratch, or the one they'd rewritten to fit their story? Took a slow breath. You're taking my name off my own walls, I said quietly. He looked down. It's for the best, Aunt C. People are starting to ask questions. I wanted to scream, but the room had already decided. In their eyes, I was no longer an artist, I was a cautionary tale. A woman who'd lost her grip on reality. And the worst part. They said it with love. As the meeting ended, Vanessa walked me to the door. Please don't be upset, she whispered. We're just trying to protect your legacy. By erasing it? I asked. Her smile didn't falter. Sometimes letting go is the kindest thing you can do for yourself. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of it, heavy, metallic, clean in a cruel way. I walked home along the lakeshore, my shoes sinking slightly into the mud. Every step felt like it left a mark that would soon be washed away. When I reached the studio, I went straight to the mirror. The room was dim, quiet except for the faint hum of the old heater. My reflection looked tired, smaller somehow. Behind me, through the glass, I could see the faint outline of the banner from earlier, Art for Tomorrow. I stared at myself and whispered, they think I'm losing my mind. And for a brief second, I wondered if they were right. Because gaslighting isn't loud, it's slow, like water wearing down stone. It starts as doubt and ends as silence. But then I remembered the mirror, the sketches, the whispers I'd written down. I wasn't crazy. I was careful. I was watching. I placed my palm against the glass. If they've decided I'm delusional, I said, then let that be my disguise. In the reflection, I didn't see a broken woman. I saw a painter, one who'd spent a lifetime understanding how shadows tell the truth when light lies. So I began to plan. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just clarity. Because if they wanted to paint me as unstable, I would let them until the day I showed them what real vision looked like. And when that day came, I promised myself, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I'd let the truth do what light always does, find its way through the cracks. After that meeting, something inside me went quiet, not broken, just still, like a lake after the storm passes, but before the reflection returns. The town believed I was losing my mind, and maybe that helped. People stopped coming by. Evan and Vanessa thought I'd given up. They moved freely now, careless in their confidence. But silence has its own kind of power. One night, I was sorting through old sketchbooks when I found the small black one I used to carry everywhere. The pages were full faces, hands, snippets of dialogue, like I'd been collecting ghosts without knowing why. I started flipping through it and realized every drawing was a record. A time, a place, a conversation. my memory preserved in graphite. The next morning I brought it to Miriam Cole. She was an old friend, a retired judge, sharp as glass, with a kindness that could cut through pretense. I'd taught her grandson, Liam, years ago. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything: the contracts, the gossip, the mirror, the meeting. When I handed her the sketchbook, her hands lingered on the cover like it was something sacred. She opened it slowly, scanning each page. "You wrote the dates?" she asked. "I did. And these words, they said these things exactly. Every one of them." She looked up at me and said quietly, "Clara, this isn't a sketchbook. It's evidence." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For months, everyone had treated my art as delusion, and now it was proof. Later that week, Liam stopped by the studio. He'd heard part of what happened at the meeting and wanted to help. He was the one who thought to check the contracts. "You said you only signed a copy, right?" he asked. "Not the original." Went digging through public records with Judge Cole's permission. It didn't take long. One afternoon, he came running back to the studio, holding a file folder, eyes wide. "You didn't sign this," he said, laying the paper on my desk. "It's your signature, but it's copied. Scanned. See this?" He pointed at the bottom corner. "Identical to the sample from your old art grant application. They pasted it." I stared at the document, the neat black ink of my name below words I'd never read. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, not because they forged it, but because they thought I'd never notice. Miriam called a contact. She trusted someone who confirmed the file metadata. The signature was duplicated. No mistake, no oversight. A fraud. That night, Liam and I sat in the studio, the mirror catching the glow of the desk lamp. He placed a small recorder on the table. "They talk a lot when they think no one's listening," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. I just nodded. We waited. A few days later, Evan and Vanessa came by to discuss international opportunities. They didn't realize the recorder was running, or that the mirror reflected every move they made. I stayed quiet, sketching by the window, pretending to be absorbed in a half-finished portrait. But my ears caught every word. Vanessa said, "Once the funding clears, we can rebrand completely. The donors won't care who the original artist was, they just want a story that sells." Evan replied, "As long as she stays quiet, we're untouchable." That was the moment the fog lifted. The mirror, the gossip, the erasure, it all made sense. They weren't trying to destroy me, they were rewriting me, turning my life's work into a stepping stone for their ambition. When they left, Liam looked at me and whispered, "We got it." I didn't smile, I just looked at the mirror again. My reflection seemed calmer now, almost peaceful. "People paint their own guilt," I said. "You just have to let the light find it." That night I went through my sketchbook again, this time not as an artist, but as a witness. Each drawing became sharper in my mind. Vanessa's hand hovering over a pen, Evan's smirk as he rehearsed his speech, the exact tilt of his head when he lied. Art has always been my language. And for the first time I realized that truth could speak through it louder than any courtroom ever could. Judge Cole looked over everything: the forged documents, the recordings, the sketches. "You don't need to fight them in public yet," she said. "Let them believe the story they wrote. Then when the time is right, tell yours." I nodded. I'd spent my life teaching students how to see not just color, but intention, light, the space between what's visible and what's hidden. Now it was my turn to use that gift for something more. As I closed the sketchbook, I felt a strange mix of gratitude and grief. I'd lost so much, but I still had the truth, and that was something they could never forge. And so, under the dim light of the studio, with the mirror watching like a silent friend, I began preparing the next exhibition. Only this time, it wouldn't be about beauty or technique. It would be about revelation. Because sometimes, the most powerful art isn't what you create, it's what you expose. The night before the exhibition, I barely slept. The air in the studio felt electric, like it remembered every secret ever whispered within its walls. I walked past the mirror, now clean and gleaming, and paused. My reflection looked steady, older, maybe, but steady. "Tomorrow," I whispered to it, You'll finally speak for me. Evan and Vanessa had spent weeks promoting their big debut press releases, interviews, glossy invitations embossed with their names. A celebration of vision, the flyers said. No one suspected that the real vision had already been painted. The morning came bright and unkind, sunlight pouring through the glass windows of the town gallery. People arrived in clusters: critics, donors, students, neighbors who once looked at me with admiration, now with polite pity. Vanessa greeted them all with her PR smile, radiant and precise. Evan hovered near the podium, practicing his speech. He didn't see me slip into the back of the room. The walls were covered with canvas. My canvases, but not as they remembered them. Each piece now showed a story Evan and Vanessa captured not in caricature, but in truth. The mirror I'd used in my studio had given me their faces exactly as they were, every smirk, every glance, every betrayal of conscience frozen in brushstrokes. When the lights dimmed, the crowd hushed. Evan took the stage. Art, he began, is the language of legacy. And today, Vanessa and I are proud to present the culmination of years of collaboration. Then the lights came on. Not his chosen spotlight, mine. The first painting illuminated was titled The Hands That Signed. It showed a desk, a pen, and two hands, Vanessa's poised with confidence, mine ghosted beneath hers. The second painting, echoes in glass, reflected them both standing before my mirror, unaware of the eyes that watched. Gasps rippled through the audience. Evan blinked, confused, then furious. This isn't part of the collection," he stammered. Vanessa stepped forward, trying to regain control. There must be a mistake, but her voice was drowned out by the faint sound that filled the gallery recordings. Their voices: "Once the funding clears, we can rebrand completely. As long as she stays quiet, we're untouchable." The whispers played softly, then louder, echoing through the room like ghosts made of sound. The crowd turned, horrified. No one looked at me as crazy anymore. They looked at me as truth personified. Evan lunged toward the control booth. "Turn it off," he shouted. But Miriam Cole, standing in the corner with her arms crossed, said calmly, "Let it play." Another painting lit up the gift of silence. It showed a woman seated before a lake, her mouth closed, but her reflection screaming beneath the surface. The voiceover continued, "We just need her name, not her permission." Someone in the audience gasped, "Oh my God." Another whispered, "That's her nephew." I stepped forward then, slow, steady. "You wanted an exhibition," I said. "Here it is. Every piece inspired by truth, every brushstroke borrowed from your own words." Evan froze. Vanessa's mascara had begun to run. "You planned this," she hissed. "No," I said softly. "You did. I just painted what I sawed." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. You could feel the collective realization, like the whole room exhaled at once. Someone from the press took a picture. The flash bounced off the mirror behind me, scattering light across the room. In that instant, every reflection, mine, theirs, the audience's, merged into one fractured truth. Evan tried to speak again, but his words stumbled. You tricked us." I looked at him, calm as the lake in winter. "No, I trusted you. You just taught me what trust looks like when it shatters." Vanessa tried to leave, but people moved aside slowly, eyes sharp with judgment. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to outrage. The same crowd that once believed their story now believed mine. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't even smile. I simply turned toward my final painting, the mirror in the room. It showed a canvas reflecting two figures fading at the edges, while behind them, an older woman stood steady in the light. The sound faded, replaced by soft piano notes, something I'd arranged with Liam. He was in the back, recording the entire scene, the truth unfolding without a single lie spoken aloud. When it ended, no one clapped. They didn't need to. Justice, in that moment, wasn't about applause, it was about recognition. Miriam walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. I shook my head. "No. I just stopped letting them do it to me." As people began to leave, some ashamed, some awed, I stayed there, staring at the paintings. My story finally visible. My name, finally mine again. The lights dimmed once more, leaving only one reflection on the glass: me, standing beneath the word exhibition. For the first time in years, I didn't see a victim. I saw an artist. And for the first time in forever, the truth was finally on display. The morning after the exhibition felt unreal. The air was still heavy with what had happened the night before, like the gallery walls were still holding their breath. I walked past the lake, its surface calm again, reflecting a world that suddenly looked cleaner. Justice doesn't roar, I thought. It whispers. Once the noise fades, news travels fast in small towns. By noon, everyone in Windermere had heard. The donors pulled out first. The city cancelled their grant. Then the local paper ran a headline that made me stop in my tracks: "The Fall of the Clara Donovan Project When Art Meets Deception." Beneath it, a photo from the exhibition: Evan and Vanessa frozen under my mirror's reflection, faces half-lit, half-shadowed. Evan called me that afternoon. I didn't pick up. His voice on the voicemail was shaky, stripped of arrogance. "Aunt C," he said, "you didn't have to do this. We were family." I played it twice, not out of pity, but to remind myself how easily the word family can become a tool. Vanessa, on the other hand, sent an email. It began with "Dear Clara" and ended with "Forgive us." No subject line, no sincerity. Just panic dressed as remorse. I didn't answer her either. Some silences are heavier than words, and mine carried the weight of every time they'd talked over me. Within a week, their world began to crumble. The sponsors withdrew. The studio lease under their name expired. Friends they'd courted for years stopped returning calls. People who once admired their ambition now used the same word they'd used for me: delusional. I watched it all from my porch, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was release. The kind that comes when the truth stops needing defense. Miriam came by that evening, her cane tapping lightly against the wooden steps. "You could press charges, you know," she said, settling beside me. "Forgery, fraud, defamation, the evidence is airtight." I shook my head. "No. I don't need the court to tell me I was right." She smiled faintly. "That's rare, Clara. Most people want the last word." "I already had it," I said. In paint. The newspaper ran a follow-up piece 2 days later. It wasn't about the scandal anymore, it was about redemption. "The woman who turned betrayal into art," the headline read. Underneath, a photo of me standing by the mirror in my studio, brush in hand, eyes steady. When the reporter called for comment, I told him one thing: what they tried to erase became the canvas I needed. After that I stayed quiet. The town's noise returned to its usual rhythm: boat horns, laughter from the coffee shop, the rustle of trees along the lake. Evan and Vanessa left Windermere not long after. Some said they moved to Chicago, others said Europe. I didn't ask. People like them always find new mirrors to admire themselves in. But something had changed in me too. For months, I'd lived in fear of being forgotten, of being invisible. Now I understood: the most dangerous kind of erasure isn't when they take your name. It's when you start believing you don't deserve to have one. Liam stopped by a few days later with flowers from his grandmother's garden. He looked at me and said, "You didn't just win, Clara. You taught the whole town what integrity looks like." I smiled, though part of me still ached for what was lost. "Integrity doesn't win," I said softly. "It just endures." That night, I returned to the studio. The mirror still stood where it always had, but now it reflected only me, and that was enough. I picked up a brush and began a new painting. The canvas was blank for a long time before the first stroke came. It wasn't anger that guided it this time. It was peace. Because justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't look like victory. It looks like quiet, like calm water after a storm. And in that stillness, I finally understood sometimes the truest revenge isn't to destroy what hurt you, it's to outlast it. A few days after the news died down, the lake finally thawed. The ice had been breaking for days, slow, gentle, deliberate. I stood on the dock, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and listened to the sound of the water breathing again. It felt like the world was exhaling with me. Liam came by that morning. He was carrying a canvas under his arm, one of my old ones he'd found in storage. "You never finished this one," he said, setting it beside me. It was true. The painting was half done, a shoreline fading into a blur, like memory dissolving into light. "I started it the year my sister died," I said quietly. Every time I tried to finish it, the color felt wrong. Too alive, maybe. He looked at it for a long time, then said, maybe it wasn't meant to be finished. I smiled. Maybe that's the point. We sat there in silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. The lake shimmered in soft morning light, and I thought about how many things in life stay half-finished, not because we fail, but because they teach us when to stop. Boundaries, I finally said. That's what this painting is about. Liam tilted his head. Boundaresses, I said. The quiet art of knowing where to end, where kindness stops being kindness, where trust stops being love, where giving stops being sacrificed. For most of my life, I thought love meant giving until there was nothing left. I thought saying yes proved I was good, worthy, generous. But all it did was teach people how to take. And when they crossed the line, I kept redrawing it just to keep the peace. Now, I realize peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender. I used to believe boundaries were selfish. But they're not. They're the frame that keeps a painting from unraveling. Without them, everything spills out, and nothing holds its shape. I took a sip of my coffee and laughed softly. You know, I spent my whole life teaching others how to see. Color, shadow, perspective. But I never taught them how to see me. I didn't even teach myself. Liam smiled. You're teaching now, whether you mean to or not. Maybe he was right. Maybe art isn't always something you hang on a wall. Sometimes it's the way you live after you've been broken. The quiet decisions, the lines you draw, the moments you finally say no without guilt. I looked at the unfinished canvas again. There are paintings that aren't meant to be completed, I said. They exist to remind us where to stop. Liam nodded. And that's okay. It was. For the first time in a long while, it truly was. The wind picked up, scattering small ripples across the lake. I thought about Evan and Vanessa, about how far they'd gone to steal something that was never theirs. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate is another kind of chain. It binds you to what hurt you. I'd rather let it go. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't reopening the door. It's locking it gently and walking away without the key. I spent that afternoon cleaning the studio, not to erase what happened, but to reclaim it. Every brush, every jar, every frame went back to its place. The mirror still stood in the corner, catching sunlight. For a moment I saw my reflection in it, older, calmer, but unmistakably mine. There was a time I feared growing invisible. Now I understood invisibility can be freedom if you choose it. You can watch, observe, create without needing to be seen, without begging for validation. As evening fell, I added a final touch to the unfinished painting, a faint line across the horizon. Not an ending, just a pause. The kind of silence that says, enough. When Liam left, he hugged me tightly and said, you know, you don't need to finish it. I already have, I said, smiling. That night, the studio glowed under lamplight. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. I felt whole. Boundaries aren't walls. They're the quiet declaration that what's inside you deserves to stay yours. And maybe that's the final lesson art gives us: not how to create, but how to protect what we create. Not how to keep giving, but how to keep something for ourselves. The lake outside was still. The air smelled like spring. And for once, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. Because now, I knew where to stop. I wrote the letter on a quiet Sunday morning. The air smelled like rain, and the lake was still enough to hold a perfect reflection of the sky. I sat by the window with my old fountain pen, the same one I used when I first started teaching, and began to write. Not to Evan, not to Vanessa, but to the ones who would come after. The ones still learning how to love and lose and start over without turning bitter. To the young, I wrote. You don't know me, but I've lived long enough to recognize the traps you'll walk into, with open eyes. I paused, looking at the ink spreading softly on the paper. You'll meet people who will tell you that kindness is your greatest strength. They'll be right. But what they won't say is that kindness without boundaries becomes an invitation for others to take more than you offered. I thought of the day I handed over the studio keys. How easy it was to mistake manipulation for gratitude. Don't let your generosity be the reason you disappear, I wrote. Because some people will build their ladders from the pieces of your trust. I took a breath, watching a leaf drift down onto the lake. And don't let anger consume you either. I've seen how it burns through peace faster than justice can rebuild it. Let go, but not before you learn what it was trying to teach you. I smiled a little as I kept writing. When you lose something, your name, your place, your pride, remember this: you can always paint again. The canvas of life never runs out, only your courage does. The pen scratched quietly against the page. Don't chase approval. The applause fades long before the art does. Do your work in truth, and let time decide who was watching. I stopped to look outside. Liam was walking along the dock, skipping stones. The ripples spread wide and soft, each one overlapping the next until they disappeared into calm. It reminded me of every small decision that had led me here, every yes I'd said when I should have said no, every silence mistaken for agreement. I kept writing. Learn to protect your silence. Not every truth needs to be shouted, and not every injustice needs revenge. Some battles are won simply by staying intact. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote the next line. If you're lucky enough to grow old, you'll discover that the truest kind of wealth isn't what you own, it's what you can still stand to look at in the mirror. I leaned back, letting the sentence breathe. It was true. After everything, the only reflection I wanted to see was one that hadn't given up on dignity. The letter continued. Don't measure your worth by how many people say your name. Measure it by how you treat the ones who don't need to know it. I thought of my students, years ago, painting their first landscapes. How proud they'd been of colors that clashed, lines that didn't fit but they painted anyway. Keep creating, I wrote. Even when the world steals your spotlight, it can't steal your vision. What's real will outlast applause. I looked over what I had written, ink smudged in places, uneven lines, but it felt honest. It felt like me. I signed it not as Clara Donovan, artist, or Clara Donovan, survivor. Just Clara. Before sealing the envelope, I added one last paragraph: one day, when you're my age, you'll realize that legacy isn't about leaving behind your work, it's about leaving behind your character. Protect it. Because long after your paintings fade, your words soften, and your hands grow still, honor will still whisper your name quietly, but faithfully. I folded the letter and placed it inside a sketchbook between two unfinished drawings. Someday someone might find it. Maybe they'll read it, maybe they won't. That didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd said it honestly, fully, without bitterness. Outside, the sun began to break through the clouds, casting soft gold over the lake. I watched it shimmer, the same way truth does when it's finally free. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. The story had spoken for itself. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for, that when the noise fades, what remains is something true, something clean, something that could only have come from the heart. The sun was sinking low over Windermere when I walked back into the studio one last time. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and pine, and the wooden floor still creaked in the same familiar way. I stood in front of the old mirror, the one that had witnessed everything, and for the first time, I didn't see a victim staring back. I saw a woman who had stopped running from her reflection. You know, we all carry a mirror inside us. Sometimes it shows our faces, sometimes it shows the choices we've made. For years I avoided mine because I was afraid of what it would reveal: the compromises, the regrets, the quiet ways I let people rewrite my story. But the truth is, a mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It simply asks, are you willing to see yourself? He reached out and touched the glass. The evening light caught my hand and scattered gold across its surface. The light in the mirror, I whispered, it's always been there. I just had to stop looking away. If you're listening to this, if my story found its way to you, maybe it's because there's a reflection waiting for you too. Maybe someone took your trust and twisted it. Maybe you've been told your voice doesn't matter, or maybe you're simply tired of carrying other people's versions of who you should be. Let me tell you this: you are allowed to reclaim your name. You are allowed to draw a new line and say, this is mine. You don't owe anyone your silence to keep the peace. You don't have to burn yourself down just to keep someone else warm. Justice doesn't always wear a robe or bang a gavel. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a single decision made in private to stop explaining, to stop apologizing, to choose yourself without shame. Outside the window, the lake caught the last light of the day. The sky turned to soft copper, and for a second, everything, the water, the studio, the mirror, was glowing. I thought about all the people who might one day stand where I was standing, staring at their own reflection, wondering if they were enough. If that's you, listen carefully. You've always been. The world may try to dim your light, to tell you that age or failure or betrayal makes you less, but none of that is true. You don't lose your worth when others stop recognizing it. You lose it only when you stop seeing it yourself. So tonight, wherever you are, I want you to find your mirror. Look into it. Not for what's gone, but for what remains. The resilience, the courage, the quiet dignity that survived when no one was watching. And when you see that light, small, stubborn, unbroken, don't turn away. Hold it. Let it remind you that justice doesn't need to shout to be real. It lives in every person who chooses truth over fear, every heart that refuses to be erased. I smiled at my reflection, just as the last bit of sunlight slipped behind the trees. The mirror no longer scared me. It didn't mock or accuse. It simply reflected the woman I had finally become. If this story meant something to you, share it. Tell someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to take back their voice, to draw their own line, to see their own light again. Because in the end, that's all justice ever asks of us. Not perfection, not revenge, just the courage to look ourselves in the eye and not look away. And as I turned off the lights and stepped out into the evening, the mirror behind me caught one last flicker of gold. It wasn't just light, it was truth. And it was enough.